you think you're in control. You think it's just a habit, a release, a moment of pleasure. But deep down, you feel it. Something is off. The more you chase it, the emptier it feels. And no matter how many times you promise yourself it's the last time, the cycle always finds its way back. That's because this isn't about lust. It's about something far older, far deeper. A wound buried in your unconscious that lust is simply trying to soothe. And unless you confront what's underneath, you'll never escape it. Carl Jung believed that when a person is trapped in addiction, especially something as primal as lust, they're not indulging in pleasure. They're avoiding pain. They're using desire to escape themselves. But what if the very thing you keep running from is the key to everything you're looking for? In this video, we're going to uncover 9 hidden psychological layers behind lust. And by the time you finish, you'll see that it was never really about lust at all. It was about who you've become in its absence. Part 1 begins with the first 3 layers. Let's begin. Layer 1. Lust is the shadow's disguise. It starts in silence, not the kind of silence that feels calm or peaceful, but the silence that stings, the silence that echoes when you're alone in your room, scrolling, searching, swiping, not because you want something, but because you don't know how to sit with what's already there. Jung called this the shadow, the part of you you've exiled, the thoughts, emotions, needs, and memories you've disowned because they didn't fit the version of you the world demanded. And lust becomes the mask your shadow wears. It shows up not as pain, but craving, not as fear, but excitement, not as loneliness, but temptation. Because if it appeared as what it truly is, hurt, abandonment, emotional hunger, you'd be forced to feel it. And that is what the unconscious tries to avoid at all costs. So instead, it turns to imagery, fantasy, dopamine. But here's the tragedy. The more you feed the lust, the more you bury the shadow. And the more you bury it, the louder it becomes. You aren't broken. You're just disconnected. The next time you feel the urge, pause. Not to resist, but to observe. What emotion is underneath this? What thought just passed? What feeling was too unbearable to sit with? You'll notice something powerful. Lust isn't the problem. It's the messenger. And when you stop killing the messenger and start decoding it, healing begins. Layer 2. Dopamine is not the same as joy. Most people confuse pleasure with happiness, but Jung warned us that what feels good isn't always what's good for you. And nowhere is this more obvious than in compulsive desire. The screen lights up. The heart races. The world disappears. And for a brief second, everything feels okay. But that feeling doesn't last. Because what you experienced wasn't joy. It was dopamine. Dopamine is the promise of reward, not the reward itself. It's the tension before the release, the anticipation before the click. And it's addictive because it feels like progress, like you're about to get something. But you never do. The brain starts craving that surge, mistaking it for connection. But every time you follow it, you're left emptier than before. It's not that you didn't find pleasure. It's that pleasure never had the power to fill the hole. Real joy isn't loud. It isn't urgent. It doesn't demand you click, consume, or chase. It's found in stillness, in meaning, in presence. Jung believed that most suffering comes from confusing stimulation with fulfillment. And once you begin to see the difference, the grip loosens. The next time you're drawn to the screen, ask, is this joy or just another hit? You'll know. Layer 3. The inner child is still searching. This part, it might hurt, because it's not about lust. It's about the child who wasn't held, the one who learned to survive through fantasy, the one who felt unseen, untouched, and unloved, and found comfort in imagining connection that never came. Jung said that every adult carries a child within them, one who remembers everything, even what your mind has tried to forget. And that child doesn't want sex. They want safety. They want to be seen, to be chosen, to be told, you're not too much, you're not too little, you're exactly enough. But when that need goes unmet for too long, it warps. It turns into craving, into projection, into the kind of desire that confuses attention for love. That's why lust feels like medicine. Because, in a twisted way, it is. It's the adult trying to fix what the child never received. But here's the truth. No amount of dopamine can heal a wound made from emotional starvation. Only presence can do that. Only self-compassion. Only reparenting. Instead of judging yourself for your desire, ask your inner child, what are you really trying to feel right now? It might answer with layons. It might answer with tears. But in that moment, healing begins. And here's where it gets even deeper. Because the hunt 3 layers, ones will reveal in part 2, show you why lust always intensifies when you're about to break through. Why the closer you get to wholeness, the more seductive the addiction becomes. And what it means when lust no longer excites you, but begins to numb you. If you've ever felt like you were healing, only to fall back harder into the habit, don't miss part 2. It explains the trap no one talks about, the moment your desire becomes disgust, and what it secretly reveals about your readiness to evolve. Keep watching. Your turning point is closer than you think. You think it's just getting worse. The cravings are stronger. The guilt is heavier. The gap between who you are and who you want to be is growing. And deep down, you worry that maybe you're just not meant to be free from this, that maybe this is just who you are now. But what if this isn't failure? What if this is the final layer, cracking? Carl Jung once said that the unconscious always chooses the right time to surface. And when it does, when the parts of you you've buried start crawling up into the light, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like falling apart. In this part of the journey, we go deeper. Because if part 1 helped you identify the patterns, part 2 will help you understand the trap, the moment when lust shifts from thrill to routine, from desire to decay. These are the layers most people never see until it's too late. But if you're here, if you're still watching, then maybe you're finally ready. Let's continue. Layer 4. Addiction. Thrives in absence of meaning. Lust doesn't just appear because you're weak. It appears because you're empty. Not in a shameful way, but in the way a person who's starving is drawn to junk food. The body isn't broken. It's desperate. The craving isn't immoral. It's misdirected. And in modern life, nothing leaves you more hollow than a life without meaning. Jung believed that meaning, not success, not pleasure, is the central requirement of the human psyche. Without it, the soul begins to decay. And when there's no greater why, lust becomes a convenient replacement. Why? Because lust is easy, immediate. It gives the illusion of aliveness. But that's the danger. It's fake fire. It looks like passion, but there's no warmth, no depth, no soul. The people who overcome addiction don't do it by just resisting urges. They replace emptiness with purpose. They stop asking, "How do I stop this?" and start asking, "What am I living for?" And it's in that question that healing begins. Because once you discover a reason to live that actually stirs your spirit, lust begins to lose its grip. You don't just need more discipline. You need more meaning. Layer 5. The ego doesn't want healing. It wants familiarity. If you've ever felt like you were finally making progress, going days or even weeks without falling back into old habits, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, you crash. That wasn't random. That was your ego fighting back. Jung said the ego isn't interested in truth. It's interested in survival. And for the ego, survival means familiarity, patterns, loops, comfort zones. So the moment you start breaking free, rewiring your responses, sitting with your cravings, changing your identity, the ego starts panicking. It doesn't know who you are without the habit. And so, it tempts you. Not because it wants you to feel good, but because it wants you to feel known. That's why you fall back, not when you're weak, but when you're strong. When you're finally close to letting go. The ego senses change, and it presses every button it knows: shame, doubt, nostalgia, fantasy. But here's the secret. The urge that appears right before the breakthrough isn't a failure. It's a signal. You're on the edge of something. If you can endure that moment, if you can just sit in it, even for a few minutes longer than usual, your ego begins to loosen its grip. And in that space, you start meeting the real you. Layer 6. Numbness is a warning, not a solution. At first, lust feels thrilling. But over time, it doesn't. It starts to feel mechanical, boring, detached. You go through the motions, but the spark is gone. And yet, you keep doing it, not because it feels good, but because you're afraid of what you'll feel without it. This is the most dangerous layer: numbness. It's the point where lust stops being pleasure and becomes anesthesia. You're no longer chasing excitement. You're avoiding reality. You don't even enjoy it anymore. You just don't know who you are without it. Jung warned that repression doesn't destroy the instinct. It distorts it. So when you numb, you don't erase the pain. You disconnect from it. And that disconnection spreads until everything starts to feel flat. Your work, your friendships, even your hopes. This is how people become ghosts while still alive. But if you're here, listening to this, it means your soul hasn't gone quiet yet. It means something inside you still wants to feel, still wants to be whole. And to reclaim that, you need to stop trying to escape yourself and start returning to yourself. Begin small. Moments of stillness, walks without headphones, sitting with discomfort, without judgment, not as punishment, but as re-entry. Because beneath the numbness isn't emptiness, it's you. And you've been waiting to be felt again. And now, we reach the final turning point, because part 3 reveals the last 3 layers, ones that most never see because they quit too soon. These layers aren't just about desire. They're about transformation. You'll learn why the final stage of lust addiction isn't obsession. It's indifference. Why apathy is the ego's last defense. And what happens when the thing that once owned you no longer moves you at all. If you've ever wanted to know what's on the other side of the addiction, what it feels like to walk away and never look back, part 3 will show you. You're closer than you think. You've released the grip. You've made peace with the silence. And now, you're standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. Not another goal. Not another craving. But a new way of being. This is the third transformation. Not the letting go. Not the integration. But the quiet power that begins to build when you no longer need power at all. It doesn't shout. It doesn't prove. It simply is. This is the self, fully remembered. Carl Jung didn't just theorize about the unconscious. He believed the path of every person was to confront the shadow, to dissolve the mask, and to return home, not to who they should be, but who they already were before the world told them to become something else. And this is that return. Let's open the final 3 layers. Layer 7. When lust fades, what's left? There's a moment most people don't expect. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't feel like victory. It almost feels like nothing. You wake up one day, and the craving isn't as loud. You go about your day and realize you didn't think about it, not because you fought it, but because it never came. This is where confusion sets in. Shouldn't you feel triumphant? Shouldn't you be more excited that lust is finally fading? But instead, it feels empty. This is a critical moment Jung often spoke about, the ego's disorientation when the identity built around pain no longer exists. When lust fades, it takes your coping mechanism with it. It takes the old rhythm of your days, the anticipation, the guilt, the bargaining. And what's left behind is a stillness you're not used to. This isn't depression. This is recalibration. It's the quiet before a new version of you emerges. But most people mistake this silence for something being wrong. They panic and run back to the noise. Don't. If you stay in the silence long enough, you'll start to hear the sound of your real desires, not for escape, not for indulgence, but for connection, purpose, presence. The fading of lust isn't the end of intensity. It's the beginning of depth. Layer 8. Real power is in choosing not to use it. One of the most dangerous myths about overcoming lust is that the goal is total immunity. That one day you'll walk through life without being tempted. That you'll be untouchable. But Jung warned against this kind of fantasy. Because true healing isn't about never being tempted. It's about seeing the temptation and choosing not to become it. This is real power. The power to flirt with your shadow and still walk in light. The power to say, I could, and still say, I won't. Not because you're afraid, but because you've grown. Temptation will still knock, but it won't feel like pressure anymore. It'll feel like a test you've already passed. You no longer need the high. You no longer chase the chaos, because you've tasted the kind of peace that doesn't cost your dignity. And now, when you look in the mirror, you see someone who didn't just avoid the fall. You built wings from the pieces of your brokenness. That is a different kind of freedom. Not the kind the world understands, but the kind your soul recognizes. You don't need to prove your strength. You just need to live it. Layer 9. The shadow. Never dies, but you don't have to obey it. This is the final truth, and maybe the hardest one. The shadow doesn't vanish. The darkness doesn't evaporate. And the parts of you that were once addicted don't get deleted. They get integrated. Jung believed that the goal of life is not perfection. It's wholeness. And wholeness includes the parts of you that once wandered, that once failed, that once ached for the quick fix. Healing isn't about becoming someone else. It's about bringing all of you home, because the shadow doesn't disappear. It just stops leading. Now you're the one in control, not with force, but with understanding. You know what the hunger sounds like. You know what the old voice tries to whisper. But now you smile at it, because you see through it. And that is liberation. You didn't destroy the darkness. You learned how to walk beside it, without following it. And now, for the first time in your life, you can choose freely, clearly, powerfully. You're no longer reacting. You're responding. You're no longer desperate. You're deliberate. You're no longer a prisoner of your craving. You're the person who made peace with it, not by killing it, but by understanding where it came from and choosing to stop feeding it. So now, what's next? What happens after the video ends? You might be tempted to forget all this, to say, that was powerful, and then go back to your old loop. But if this resonated, if even one of these layers exposed something in you, don't run. Sit with it. Ask yourself, which part of me still craves illusion? What am I really running from? And who could I become if I finally stopped? Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But you're not bound to fate. You've seen the patterns. You've felt the pull. And now, you've chosen to wake up. If you made it this far, you've done what most never do. You didn't just want change. You faced yourself to get it. And that means you're ready. If this message spoke to you, tell me how. Drop a comment. Share the layer that hit you hardest. And if you want to go deeper, subscribe. This journey is far from over. But now, you're not walking through it blind anymore. You're walking through it aware. And that changes everything.